How to set yourself up before you begin your contest prep. Now, irrespective of whether this is your first time stepping on stage or if you've been competing over X amount of years, these are a few imperative aspects that I would always take into consideration before you actually make that transition and begin your contest prep. The first one would be, if you're somebody who is looking to invest in a coach for the first time, or if you're making the transition from one previous coach to another coach for whatever personal reason it may be, you want to ensure that you allow a sufficient amount of time prior to when you actually start your contest prep to give your coach the ability to establish the foundational pillars. Now, from a dieting standpoint, you want to always allow, in my opinion, 2 to 3 months prior to when you start to tidy things up. So if you need to remove junk food that you've been having in the peak of your off season, if there's any hidden calories that you've been consuming, whether that's from lattes from your Costa run or your Starbucks run or whatever it may be, you need to establish that set point in terms of calorie intake. You need to create that consistency, and a 2 to 3 month period before you start would be sufficient, in my opinion. Also, you need to set your non-negotiables. Are there any foods or sauces or the sugar-free syrups, flavor drops, those sort of things that you would like to factor into your diet? Because what tends to be quite common is people add these things in, especially towards the latter end of their prep. When things become difficult, when hunger is elevated and they become ravenously more hungry, they start adding more things to curb those cravings. And this can be more problematic because you're just adding more calories into the environment. So set those non-negotiables prior, so about a month out. Whatever foods you would like to add in, what vegetables you would like to add in, what sauces, what seasoning, what flavor drops, syrups, whatever they may be, add them in a month prior, keep them in constant, and then if you need to remove them at a later date, you can remove them as opposed to adding them in. Also, do you need to mini cut? Do you need to add a mini cut phase in prior to starting your prep? If so, are you allowing even more time than that 2 to 3 month period to allow for that mini cut phase to tidy up, bring you back up to your maintenance calories, and then transition into contest prep? From a training standpoint, do you need to factor in a deload? Are you systemically fatigued prior to starting your prep? Do you need to factor in that deload beforehand? Do you have any movements that have stagnated, in terms of, do you have the capacity to continue progressively overloading those movements, or have they stagnated or even worse, diminished? Do you have to look at moving some movements out because they're driving up too much fatigue? When we're looking at that stimulus to fatigue ratio, if you have movements in at the beginning of your prep that's driving up too much neural fatigue, then that again is going to be problematic. So address your training program, make alterations if you need to exercise selection or even exercise sequencing. Now, lastly, from a PED standpoint, if you are somebody who is assisted, how long have you been on a cycle prior to starting your contest prep? If you've been on for a prolonged period of time, do you need more time to allow for a restoration phase? Do you need to run a cruise phase, for lack of a better term, prior to you starting? And then lastly, do you have any up-to-date blood work pulled? Ideally, within a 2 to month time frame, we want to be able to establish where your biomarkers are prior to starting your contest prep. So these are just a few considerations that we should always think about before we start our contest prep, to ensure that we can elicit the maximum desired outcome during that prep, making it as smooth as possible for yourself so that you can come in with your best condition.